I'm 17 and I live with my divorced mom, my uncle, my mom's brother, and their mom, my granny. So the place where we live, it's kind of on the outskirts of Kolkata. Basically, we live in this apartment complex outside Kolkata, and surrounding our complex, it's mostly villages and miles of trees and shit. Basically, these lands are under the WB government, but the projects haven't started yet. It gets very quiet around here after 7 p.m. People don't go out. Shops close, no cars around. Basically, the place dies till the morning. My mother is a deeply religious woman, and she believes in things I'm skeptical about. For instance, spirits. A few weeks ago, she gave me this rocker kobach. The literal translation is protective bracelet. It's supposed to keep me safe, apparently. Even though I didn't believe in all this, to give her the peace of mind, I wore it on my left wrist. I remember that day. We ran out of flour, and my mother gave me some money to buy some, and I could spend the rest of the money and buy something for myself. We have Spencer's in our complex, and I got the things Mum asked for. I was left with 60 rupees, and I knew there was this awesome shop which sold Malai tea for like 50 rupees. The catch was, it was outside our complex, a few kilometers into a forest road. I rode my bike to the shop, but unfortunately, it was closed. It usually stays open till 9 p.m. That day it closed at 7:30. I don't know why. I was coming back all pissed, and I saw Sadhu, a holy monk, who kept staring at something behind me. I stopped and looked behind. There was nothing behind me. "Sir, is there any problem?" I asked. The man smiled and said, "Never take off that bracelet, son. May God bless you." I gave him the 60 rupees I had as an offering. Honestly, I wanted to do something good, but his words bugged me for a few days. A few days later, I woke up from a nightmare. Don't remember what it was. It was 2:30 in the night. My mother was sleeping beside me, but she didn't wake up. I thought I should wash my face and drink some water and go back to sleep. When I entered my room after doing so, to my horror and my amazement, I could see myself sleeping beside my mother. I screamed at the top of my lungs. No one woke up. I looked outside the window. The whole world and the view I saw from my window. It was usual, except everything seemed a bit off and drab. I went into the living room. I swear to fucking God, I could see shadows on our couch. I started running and pressed the button for the elevators frantically. Everything seemed off. The lift ride took 2 or 3 seconds. I live on the 7th floor. In our common area lobby, the security guard was sleeping. I tried to wake him up, but my hand just went through him. I couldn't touch him. I went outside our building and into the enormous football ground, and I ran as fast as I could. I wanted this to stop. As soon as I started to run, I could hear distinct whispers, and I felt the whole world was zooming out. And then I fell. I scratched my knee badly. I didn't know what to do. So I just dragged my feet back to the building, got on the elevator, and entered my room. I was losing my mind about the fact I could see myself sleeping. I just closed my eyes and lied down in the corner of my room. The next morning I woke up, back to my normal self. Everything seemed fine. I felt unusually fresh. My mom gave me a glass of water in bed. I drank it, and when I was just about to get out, I felt a shiver down my spine. My right knee hurts. I went into the bathroom hurriedly and pulled my pants down. The scratch from whatever I experienced, it was there on my right knee. It hurt the same way as it did earlier. I really do not know how to explain this or prove my words, but it happened. Most importantly, the scratch looked fresh, as if it happened a few hours earlier. Can someone please explain this concept of astral projection, and how does it work? I've been researching this. I feel like I'm losing myself. Okay, let me preface this by saying I have tarot cards, and I do readings from time to time. I'm not sure if that has anything to do with what's happening, but it's worth noting. It's also worth noting I'm the only person in my house who does tarot. My parents are Christian and very against it. I hide it from them. We have had some weird encounters in our house for years, but nothing so extreme that we felt the need to move. For instance, this blanket in our house went missing, and one day my mum found it in our backyard lying in the dirt. Another time, my nightlight went missing. It's like a lava lamp, but a little smaller. Everyone in the house knows that I need this light. I'm terrified of the dark, and I've never moved that light before. One night I turn it on, and it's gone. I looked everywhere, under my bed, all throughout the house, but couldn't find it. My whole family denied moving the lamp. Then I started openly talking about how there might be a ghost and we need to sage the house. A week goes by. I wake up in the morning and the lamp is laying next to me in my bed. Okay, here's the most recent thing. So the other day I stayed at my boyfriend's house and I got home. My mom said that her and my dad were in the living room talking about how there's a ghost in our house. As this was happening, the box on our mantle with my cat's ashes in it fell off the mantle. It freaked my mum out. Then today, I'm in the living room and my dad finds picture frames that fell off the mantle. I asked him whose pictures fell off, and they were all mine. Our mantle has photos of me, my brother, my mum, and my dad, but only the pictures of me fell face down off the mantle. I'm really freaked out. I told my friend this and he made a joke saying, "Yeah, usually in the movies it means you're the next to die." Now I'm really paranoid. What does this mean? So when I was about 11, I'd love to ride my bike. I could do it for hours. One day, I decided to go to the forest. It was near the village I was living in, a kilometre away. Around 40 metres away from it, I noticed something. It was something white in the grass on the left side of the road. Under a rock, there was a piece of paper. On the paper was written with charcoal, "Hello." As a dumb kid, I came back the next day. The paper piece was still there. But when I got there, it also had a piece of paper with the word "Hi." Then I came back the next day too, and it was written on it, "How are you?" I had paper and pencil on me, and I wrote back, "I'm good. You?" Things were going really good. Once, I tried staying there the entire day and night to find out who was the dude that was writing those. I told my parents I'd stay with a friend. It was in vain. No one came. Time passed and we became really good friends. We'd have conversations and we grew really close. One day, not intentionally, we just stopped talking. I came to the place less and less until I stopped. The last letter I remember the thing he wrote was, "Gonna miss you." Around 20 years passed. I'm 32 and I found written on paper with charcoal, with a rock on top, in front of my house, "Missed me?" After a few months of us living in this home, which we planned to use as our second home, we decided to sell it after some unusual experiences. Our real estate salesperson and the person who bought our home are aware of my claims and have made an informed decision to purchase this home despite my claims. They probably think I'm a nut. The home is not an old home. It was built in 2019 and we're the third owners. We've gotten an air quality test done in the home. Both my husband and I have gotten physical examinations and nothing out of the ordinary has come out of these tests. Now I'll get into my experience. We bought our winter home last year in June of 2021. Originally we're from Canada, but we've spent the majority of the pandemic between the USA and recently Costa Rica. My first experience was while I was taking a shower. The house has an ensuite washroom. When you enter the room, if you go to the left, you'll go towards the bathroom. If you go to the right, you'll end up in the bedroom. From the shower, you can see the entrance to the bedroom. One afternoon while I was showering, I watched my half-naked husband walk into the bedroom with a glass of lemonade. I then turned around to wash the soap off my face and then turned back toward the door to rinse the shampoo out of my hair. This is when I saw my half-naked husband enter the bedroom again with the lemonade. When I exited the shower, I asked my husband if he re-entered the room a couple of times, and he said he only came into the bedroom once and has been there for the majority of my shower. My husband had a similar experience. He was in the backyard looking into the kitchen. He claimed he saw me leave the kitchen and walk towards the mudroom. He was very confused when he entered the house to find her empty, only to find out I'd been out for a couple of hours. On multiple occasions, I've heard the sound of my husband's car dragging on the driveway. We have the steepest driveway on the block. Every time he parks in the garage, you hear the distinct sound at the bottom of the car scraping the driveway. When I hear this, I usually unlock the garage door. There have been multiple times when I've heard this sound, unlock the door, just to find out he isn't home. We've both heard unexplainable whistling sounds that stop once we acknowledge the sound. I guess it could just be the vents, but for 3 days last week, our thermostat stopped working and we still heard the whistling. There have been other trivial occurrences. I once woke up in the middle of the night because the fridge door alarm was going off. We have those annoying automatic toilets where the lid lifts when it detects motion. Well, those open on their own sometimes. I understand with modern upgrades we're going to be malfunctioning, so I put those experiences under the questionable category. So we've spent the past week packing our things. We're those psychopaths that do not store anything in our garage other than our vehicles. The only other thing that's found in the garage is the water softener tank. That's it. So one lovely night, the car alarm goes off on both vehicles. Convinced that we're being robbed, we call the police, and of course, the neighbourhood security also comes by just to see that our cars are perfectly in the garage with no signs of an intruder. We officially moved out of the house 3 days before closing. We couldn't bear another day there, and our neighbour texted me to ask what all the commotion was at our house. I have no idea what she's talking about because we moved out. I may sound like a kook, but we've lived in so many houses. We've never experienced anything like this. After disclosing why we moved, she revealed that the original owners collected artifacts, and that's how they decorated their home. She described their house as looking like a museum and did not like being there, partly because the wife took such special care with the artifacts, and she didn't want to damage anything, and because she felt unwanted in their home. Aside from that, the original owners were a fun older couple that had an estranged child. This is where things get pretty interesting, and for ease of understanding, I'm going to give everyone's names. Let's call the original owners the Benders, the son Josh, and the neighbour I'm corresponding with, Betty. So the Benders were well off, and they didn't believe in nepotism or giving handouts, so once their child finished college, he was cut off. Josh was very vocal about his parents not giving him money and stopped visiting his parents altogether. Well, eventually the Benders died, and in their will, the deed to their primary residence in a chalet was left to Josh, but no money, allegedly. So Josh conducts an estate sale and sells all of the valuable artifacts his parents collected over the years. Betty claimed that some pieces were completely damaged and suspected something shady was going on because the Benders were the kind of people who would have their furniture donated or given to some kind of cause. They wouldn't have a garage sale to get rid of them. So things get even spicier now. Josh moves in and is causing a ruckus, throwing parties every night. There are speculated sex workers coming in and out of the community. The HOA can't do much about his behaviour because he isn't technically doing anything wrong. He's just being annoying. Betty claims Josh eventually stopped with the partying, but things got weird. He started speaking to himself, and she occasionally saw him slapping the pavement and talking to trees, and just a lot of weird shit. Then one day, Josh was naked on someone's property and defecated himself and was arrested. The house was then vacant for 3 or 4 years and was sold and demolished. Whew, quite the story. Anyway, I'm wondering whether the artifact had anything to do with the experiences we had. Maybe there was a spirit attached to some of the possessions that were broken during the estate sale. Especially since Mrs. Bender took really good care of the things. Maybe she used the items for spiritual purposes. So this has bothered me for a while, and I wanted to share it here to hopefully find some closure and answers. My great-grandmother raised me. She was basically my mother. She passed away in 2015 from a multitude of issues, but she was tough as a pine knot and held on a lot longer than they thought she would. Anyway, before she passed away, she would see things. Our family has always been sensitive to seeing things, experiencing hauntings, close encounters, etc. The stories I could tell. Anyway, she left me her home, my home, when she passed, and I still reside there with my husband. We've had a couple weird things happen since he moved in, but I'm getting sidetracked. She told me of 3 occurrences that haunt me still. The first that comes to mind happened when I was out of town on vacation in Myrtle Beach. I called every morning and evening to check in, and at my usual evening call, she answered, and I could tell she was upset. I asked her what was wrong, and she told me she was terrified. I asked why. "You were just sitting on the couch." No, I wasn't." "I know that, but you were. The phone started ringing and it was laying right beside you, and I couldn't understand why you wouldn't answer it. I got kind of mad at you. You just kept staring at me and wouldn't talk when I told you to answer the darn phone." "Am I still there?" "Well, no, but it scared me." I advised her to get her Bible and read from Psalms, hoping it would calm her and scoot whatever it was to a dark corner away from her. The first time she saw these things, I was home, but I wasn't aware of anything until the next day. She was a night owl and would sometimes sit up in her recliner reading or whatever till 1 or 2 in the morning. This time, she was reading and she said something that told her to look up. Her mother and husband were sitting across the room from her, staring at her, not saying a word. She was too scared to speak to them. Her husband had been dead for 12 years at this point, and her mother had been dead for nearly 9 years. She knew they weren't real. She didn't know what these things were, but she knew not to speak to them. When she saw Not Me, she honestly thought it was me. I don't know if Not Me looked more real than the first ones or what. Maybe since she knew they were past and absolutely could not be real, they scared her more. One thing I remember is what she said about their eyes. She said their eyes were dead. I wear glasses, so she couldn't see Not Me's eyes as well as the other 2. The third creature was the scariest of all. If I remember right, it was the first thing she had seen inside our new house since we moved in. She was asleep and felt something on the foot of her bed. Her bed was parallel to the window, and the outside dusk to dawn light shone through the curtain, enough to light up the room a little bit. She sat up and looked to the foot of the bed and saw a small, hunched, black form sitting on its haunches, looking over its shoulder at her. It was very different from the others. She said it out loud, "In the name of Jesus, you must leave." She said it flinched away and jumped off the bed. She reached over and flicked on the bedside lamp, but her room was empty. If anyone has any input or ideas, feel free to share them. There's been so much more stuff to happen, but these creatures are at the forefront of my mind. I worry they might have done something to her. She passed away right after the first incident I listed, the last incident as it would happen. When I was 10 years old, my family moved from Toronto to a small town of about 1,000 people in rural New Brunswick, Canada. It's a historic area, mostly old-timers, with a strong religious culture, to the point that this town of 1,000 people has 6 large churches and several smaller ones. The house we moved into was a small duplex, with us occupying both top and bottom, and there were no other houses for about a kilometre. The only other property or place nearby was the historic graveyard, with graves dating at the earliest in the 1800s, and this was about 20 feet from the house, as the place had been the old gravekeepers. On the day of my 11th birthday, I had invited a friend to sleep over, while my sisters were sleeping upstairs. I had the only room in the basement to myself, which had been converted for a wine cellar. Enough setup. On the night of the sleepover, everything had been normal so far, aside from the usual weird feelings, traps turning on themselves, which I didn't think was spooky yet, and lights flickering, which we also think was just normal for the area. My parents are out drinking, and when my sisters went to bed around 10 p.m, my friend and I went to bed shortly after, turning off all the lights, popping on the oil heater, it was the dead of winter at the time, and set up a sleeping bag on the floor of my room. Around 12 midnight, known because of the chime clock, I woke up in bed feeling uneasy and frigid cold. I sat awake for about 20 or so minutes until I started hearing strange noises. They sounded like an old man moaning in pain and a chain or something metal dragging on the floor on the other side of my door. I tried to ignore it, but soon after my friends started shaking me, thinking I was asleep, panicking because they also heard the noises. The noises continued for about 5 more minutes or so, and then he begged me to turn on the lights because they were scared. I flicked on the small lamp at the foot of my bed, and just a few moments later, my friends started screaming and pointing to the ceiling. On the ceiling, covering pretty much the whole space, were what looked like dozens of shadowy hands and arms stretching out from above, reaching down towards us, but too far away to really grab anything. My friend was religious and started praying in a loud voice over and over and asking the hands to stop. They soon did, and for a moment, everything was fine again. It got warm, the hands were gone, and my friend and I were both starting to calm down. Then, it got much, much worse. Suddenly, the lamp turned off. Everything went from kind of dark to completely black and dead silent. A figure I can only describe as a tall, shadowy person draped entirely in a black robe and carrying a large book walks through the wall to my left, which was at most 5 feet from my feet. We could only see them because despite being all black, they were illuminated in a bright reddish/yellow glow. The figure stopped, turned and stared at me for an uncomfortable amount of time, and eventually held up a long, not crazy long, but like maybe 6 inches finger in my direction, then pointed to their book, which then opened by itself. At this point, I let out the loudest scream I could possibly, hoping to wake my sisters, only to notice there was no sound. I looked to my friend who has their mouth open, looking like they're screaming as well, and still no sound. I looked to the window to see if my parents are back, hoping they are, and the window is pitch black. Not even the outside light is shining through. Or the usually spooky view of the graveyard I have, just blackness. I look back to the figure, and it starts to move towards me, but I suddenly feel like there's no threat and feel kind and knowing, almost like you get from your grandparents or animals. And it walks towards me and disappears just before it comes into contact with my feet. Immediately after they disappear, the light comes back on. The window is no longer black, and I can hear again. I hear my door banging and my dad screaming at me from the other side. He's been there for hours apparently, unable to get in, hearing me and my friend screaming at the top of our lungs from the other side. I get up and let him in, which I had no problem with from my side, and he lets me know what he just heard. He also lets me know the couple hours part, which to me didn't make sense, because from what I judged by the time this went on, it was at least 1 a.m. It was 7 a.m. The sun was actually just starting to come up, which I now just noticed through the window. My friend called his parents to come get him immediately, and shortly after left. I sat up with my dad as everyone else went back to sleep, and we had a chat in the kitchen. Apparently, this wasn't the first scary thing to happen in the house in the few weeks we'd been there. My mother, who was a homemaker and at the house all the time, had been hearing moaning sounds during the day, seen the appliances turn themselves on and off, and said that she kept being woken up by the sound of someone screaming in her ear in the middle of the night. My dad didn't believe it initially, but after I described to him my encounter and the fact he couldn't get into my room despite there being no lock on any door in our house, he started to. We moved out of that house less than a month later, which to be honest, financially destroyed my family. We couldn't find a buyer because locals thought the place to be very haunted, and we had to rent a small 2-bedroom bungalow. For the rest of my young life, that friend would never talk to me or hang out with me again, despite having been my best friend up to that point, I thought. Years later at a party, when I came home from university, I saw him at the campfire and started to chat. We went over what each other had been up to, what our goals were, etc. Eventually, I asked why he stopped hanging out with me. He told me he still vividly remembered that night, and then described it exactly how I remembered it, down to the smallest details. He said he told his father when he got home what happened, and his father, being the spiritual leader for his tribe, and has told him to never come into contact with me, as there was a malicious spirit tied to my person that could start following him instead. Eventually, he stopped caring about that, and that's why he even talked to me at that party. UFO sighting when I was 18. 12 years later, a visit from a man and a woman in black who asked me about the above encounter. They showed me 3 pictures of the encounter, and those pictures were as if they had been taken with my own eyes, rather than an actual photo. They were incredibly interested to hear whether I had any subsequent paranormal experience. 2 weeks before the birth of my first child, we had a light manifest in our room, but when it blinked out, it drained every single electrical device with a battery in the room. When discussing with the group I was part of, it was suggested it may have been a warning. Subsequently, 2 weeks later, my wife was rushed to hospital and ended up having to have an emergency cesarean after we discovered my wife had suffered from a detached placenta. Luckily, all ended up well. I appreciate that the above experience and their believability will greatly depend on the provenance of the person reporting the events, and you, the reader, who will have your own ideological belief systems and life experiences. You should know that I'm working on a hypothesis that states that both the paranormal experience and ufological experiences are part of the same phenomena. I strongly believe there's a science-based background to this that can explain both despite what you may be told. Nikola Tesla. If you want to find the secret of the universe, think in the terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That was the starting point from which my research started. I looked at physics modelling, in particular M theory, which is essentially the amalgamation of multiple versions of string theory. A brief synopsis suggests that if you keep on looking at particles getting smaller and smaller, you reach a point where all you're left with are filaments of energy called strings. It is these strings that create matter as we know it. These strings have different vibrations to them. String theory also goes on to suggest there are 11 dimensions. 10 regular dimensions, and then space-time is treated as its own dimension. From this explanation, it will be obvious I am not a physicist, and there are people far smarter than me that will be able to give a more precise definition. But hopefully, that's enough to illustrate the point. This is something I'll be coming back to shortly. When investigating the paranormal field, either unintentionally or intentionally, the focus is on frequency. This can come in the form of full spectrum photography, EMF gadgetry, audio recorders, and transmitters. All of these devices are being used to capture empirical data without necessarily understanding what is being captured. Whether we see it, hear it, or even feel it, energy as we perceive it is part of the same spectrum. From static fields to slow/long wavelength, approaching 0 cycles per second, and up to what we can assume is an infinitely fast, short wavelength. Bandwidth is a range of frequencies within this spectrum associated with a specific topic. We're most familiar with bandwidths such as visual, audio, radio, infrared, ultraviolet, etc. Static fields, those with essentially no measurable frequency, include magnetics, batteries, and the potential charge that zaps our fingers when we reach for a door handle. An intriguing yet seldom discussed aspect of the EM spectrum is brainwaves, from 0 Hz up to 60 Hz. Within this frequency range, we also find information covering the Schumann resonance, frequencies associated with the Earth's magnetic field. So the takeaway from the above is that on a day-to-day level, we're exposed to multiple frequencies, whether it be light or radio waves, ranging to our brain waves. So for example, 7 to 12 Hz is the frequency that our brain emits when we're relaxed, post-sleep. 15 to 24 Hz is when the brain is in its active conscious state. This particular frequency range is also often where we're susceptible to paranormal experience. So what, you may ask? Well, the human body is a giant antenna that's used to collect information. The brain is the processing unit. It takes in all the information, but it's the conscious mind that makes sense of all this. It's what separates us from merely walking computers. When I refer to consciousness, I'm defining it as a construct that allows for the transfer of information. Giulio Tononi is a neuroscientist and psychiatrist who holds the David P. White Chair in Sleep Medicine, as well as a distinguished chair in consciousness science at the University of Wisconsin. He worked on a mathematical scale of consciousness called phi. On the phi scale, at the top is the human brain, but as you get further down the scale to, say, a mouse, which doesn't have the same amount of information transference, then down to a worm, which has even less. Eventually, get down to subatomic particles, which have a value of less than 1, but are critically higher than 0. This may suggest a form of universal consciousness. However, I also don't believe this is a supporting argument for God either. It suggests that consciousness as we know it can't be described by the 4 existing forces of nature: space, time, mass, and charge. Therefore, it should be in fact treated as a new 5th force of nature. Interestingly enough, experiments with the Large Hadron Collider have suggested that there is indeed a new force of nature waiting to be defined. To bring this all together, if you're still with me, let me give you the analogy of resonance. Imagine you have 2 identical tuning forks attached to 2 blocks of wood, and on the second tuning fork, you have a ping pong ball. You strike the first fork and it chimes, but then you will notice that the second tuning fork also vibrates, and the ping pong ball is then seen bouncing around. In this analogy, consciousness is striking the first tuning fork, and it's looking for frequencies that it can resonate with, the second fork. Once it connects, then there's the transference of information. In this analogy, the ping pong ball is bouncing around. So to recap, I'm saying the science shows that at any one time, we're bombarded by different frequencies. It is our conscious mind that makes sense of it. Now this is where physics begins to play with you a bit. Robert Lanza, biocentrism. The universe arises from life. He suggests that you place biology above physics and chemistry. He argues if you include life and consciousness to the equation, then suddenly you can explain a lot of the key questions in physics. Essentially, we have to understand the universe in our head before we can understand the universe around us. Consciousness relates to a physical process. 1. Self. I control my fingers, for example. 2. Everything we see around us is occurring in our minds. We can't actually see through the bones of our cranium. Everything we encounter around us is a construct of the mind. Even the light we see moving around us is actually something the mind is creating as a process. If you were to look outside and see a blue sky, your mind could be programmed that instead of seeing a blue sky, it may be seeing a purple sky, or that seeing a particular colour might trigger a particular urge, like what we see with some birds. So the underlying principle is that reality cannot exist without consciousness. Life is constantly creating the reality around us. There is then the more traditional view of the universe around us. Phew, are we still here? Well, let's take a step into the multiverse and specifically space-time, not space and time. So regardless of which version of string theory you refer to, there's an element of space-time. Typically, the 4th dimension, that is dependent on which model you're following. If you were to view yourself in the 4th dimension, you would see every instance of your life coexisting in one spot. Imagine a slinky on one end is your birth and the other your death. Coordinates as you know it don't exist. You're able to teleport. Language isn't needed, as remember, you aren't moving from point to A to point B, as we understand in the 3D dimension. Telepathy would more likely be used. These are all thought experiment questions that have been asked through science, rather than me just making this up. Look up Neil deGrasse Tyson, who has typically posed a lot of these questions. Now, if you look at a lot of these responses, they seem to coincide with a lot of tropes from abduction experiences. Being transported from one place to another, telepathy, etc. I believe that a lot of ET experiences are multidimensional, or beings that have access to that level of a technology. When people see paranormal phenomena, I also believe that what they're witnessing is a manifestation into our dimension. Going back to the original hypothesis, it's the conscious mind with the analogy of the tuning fork. I believe that it's possible to tune into the frequency, so to speak, and often experiencing one thing opens the door to the other. Okay, so here's some initial background first. I would consider myself sensitive rather than psychic. I've had a vast number of varied experiences, and I'm a paranormal investigator. I say sensitive because I can't do things on demand, but it's fair to say I attract it. The relevance of this is that I try to investigate after the experience, and I hope it adds some credence to the experience. So at the time, I was 32, and my wife was very heavily pregnant with our first child. We were living in a mid-terrace Edwardian house, and we were in our front room, which the front door opens into, with one other door which backed into the living room. The windows were double glazed and the fireplace was closed off. It was December and our central heating was on, so the internal temperature was 18 degrees. The electrical items we had in the room were a PC, tablet, phone, and a couple of chargers. Okay, scene set. So my wife was sitting next to me on our couch and we were chatting when I noticed a very sudden temperature drop around me. I asked my wife if she felt anything and she said no. I could see my breath as it was that cold, but my wife was unaffected. I got up and swapped places with my wife so she was in the same spot and nothing. We checked for drafts and there was nothing. It was totally fixed around me. I sat back down and I could still see my breath. Then, in the corner of the room, a small light appeared which began to get brighter and larger. It flickered and it was trying to get bigger. It managed to get to the size of an apple and then blinked out. The temperature returned to normal. However, the room had what can only be described as a very, very still feeling to it. Now here's the interesting point. Every single electrical device with a battery in the room was completely drained. No power, wouldn't turn on. I was fascinated and intrigued. I spoke to a couple of colleagues who were immediately very concerned. They asked whether my wife was okay, and I said yes. Well, they said that could have been a warning. For something to make that much of an effort to come through would normally be associated with a warning of some kind. Well, 1 week later, I had to rush my wife to hospital. My daughter was born 3 weeks early via emergency cesarean. My wife had a detached placenta, which nearly killed them both. They were in hospital for a month, but 9 years on, I have 2 children and all are fine and well. I do believe that was a warning, and for the first couple of years of my daughter's life, whenever she was ill or wasn't sleeping, an orb used to appear outside our bedroom and float to the door of our nursery, and then would disappear as soon as we entered the room. I had lost my granddad 6 months before, and lost Gran after my daughter was a few months old. First of all, I'm an experienced paranormal investigator who's been active for around 20 years. I've been a member of various paranormal investigator groups and I've experienced a great deal of paranormal phenomena firsthand. Personally, I find that I get build-ups of paranormal activity around me from time, which then will lead to a standout event. For me, low-level activity is the usual orbs, occasional mist, and if someone is feeling particularly mischievous, then maybe the occasional item will move. I'm not in any way threatened, and I'm also not religious, so I do not believe in angels or demons. One such event that happened to me was last night. I had just come to bed and my wife was asleep. I was just under the covers when, as clear as anything, a youngish American voice simply said, "Hello?" as in a question. The reason why I mention nationality is because I'm a Brit based in the UK. So first things first, could it possibly have been an auditory hallucination? That could potentially be the most logical suggestion. A possible microsleep, and is the brain essentially digging out itself, providing mental stimulus? I do have Google Home in the house, but it was a different voice, so that seems unlikely. I checked the rooms to make sure there were no audio devices playing, no laptops on, and again there was nothing that stood out as a potential source of the sound. What stands out was the absolute clarity and accent of the hello, which was asked as a question. Now, I don't use spirit boards personally, as I find they tend to be highly unreliable. I will be asking out over the next couple of nights to see if the person will come forward, or whether it was a one-off. For context, I've lived in Delhi, India in a rented place for the last 6 months. So this building has 3 floors, and on each floor, 2 families live in their respective partitions. We're on the 3rd floor, above which there's a terrace which is locked to us at the time. Around once per month, we can hear footsteps, large and noisy, of someone running all over the terrace, only after the sun has set. The first time this happened, we thought that it was the kids from below making ruckus. But when Mom went upstairs to check and opened the door to the terrace, the sound immediately disappeared, and no one was there. Then we got to know the real story from our neighbour lady. A man and his wife used to live in a building just behind ours. The lady fled with someone else, and her husband committed suicide. After that, no one has been able to stay in that room, and there's some activity on our terrace too. Till now, I wasn't scared much, until today. My indoor/outdoor cat was with me near the gate, a see-through one, and out of the blue, she started crying. She's never done this before. Then we could hear the loud footsteps again. We were quite a bit scared. Another thing is that both me and my mother sort of heard someone screaming a few minutes after that, a man, and the scream seemed to have come from above. Any thoughts on this? The spirit apparently doesn't come here on our floor and is seemingly harmless, but the activity was greater than usual today and has made me scared enough to write this at 2:40 a.m. My family has been living in our house since 2007. I was in elementary school at that time. The following years after 2007 had 0 paranormal encounters until 2018, and it's still going on to this day. Back in college, the folks at my house say that they always hear footsteps from the stairs. Take note, it's just me, my dad, and his girlfriend. And when I was in college, I was away from home. They also say that when my dad looks up the stairs, he always sees a little kid looking back at him. One time, our maid was cleaning my room, and when she looked under my bed, she saw the face of a child looking straight at her. She described it like it was the kid from The Grudge. In my dad's room, the mattress always feels like someone is jumping up and down on the spot. I personally have never experienced none of these paranormal phenomenons until 2020. So in my room, there's always this eerie feeling that someone else is with you, even though you're alone. I've grown to not make a fuss about this through the years, but sometimes the feeling just messes with me, that I turn on my lights at night time, and to this day, I still leave my lights on before sleeping. One night, I was sleeping next to my girlfriend in my girlfriend's room. I dreamt that I was back in my room, and it felt like I was in real life. And when I turned to my left, I saw the lady. I couldn't see her face. She was wearing an all-black gown, and she was looking right at me. The first thing I did was call my girlfriend's sister's name, since she sleeps in the same room. And that's when I woke up. It was very mind-fucking because it really felt like I was in my room, but then just a second later, I'm suddenly in my girl's house. My girlfriend also has the same dream that I had too. She also saw the woman. The next day, I googled if this was a common sleep paralysis scenario, but it's not. I thought it would be the old hag thing, but it didn't do what it usually does, like sit on my chest. I haven't dreamt about the woman ever since, but since that incident, we've both been getting a lot more energy from the ghosts at home. When my friends are over, the more sensitive friends feel a presence in the very same area where I saw the woman. At 3 a.m, my dog barks at the same location. My girlfriend keeps getting sleep paralysis in my home. My girlfriend's sister felt her hair get pulled when she was sitting in the same damn location. Yesterday, a visitor came over with her 2 kids. They say the kids saw an old woman peeking through the bathroom window. They say sometimes the woman just stands and walks in the hall between rooms. My girlfriend asked the kids what the woman looks like. They said she was beautiful, had long hair, old, and it was wearing a black gown. I think the ghosts are leeching onto us. Sometimes I feel so negative when I'm at home. I think my dad is undiagnosed with bipolar disorder. We haven't checked. So we're used to him being mighty angry. But ever since these paranormal scenarios have happened, I personally feel that his anger and rage has gotten worse. Back in 2018, my dad installed a big mirror he bought from the mall, and it's placed on top of the TV, facing their bed. He covered the mirror a few months later because he felt off, and it's been covered since. I have a feeling that the mirror has something to do with the woman. I don't know what to do. The spirits aren't bothering me too much, but it's freaky. I love to drive for DoorDash in my free time. Something about getting out past midnight and just driving is very soothed to me. Why not make some money doing it? My wife hates it though. Specifically, me going out past midnight in what she calls the bad sides of town. I don't see like that though. I've driven for DoorDash for a bit now, and I've never once felt a fear for my own safety, much less a fear for my life, and I love driving on the west side, south side, and downtown around midnight. Let me run through my shift tonight. I started my dash at around 5 PM to hit the dinner rush. It was slow, so I did a lot of waiting for a while. 6 PM, I started to feel oddly restless, in a way I haven't felt before. I felt like I needed to get out of my car and run a mile, like I couldn't keep my legs still. I parked at a gas station to walk around and get a soda and some water to calm my nerves. It worked for a bit. 7 PM, I drove to the west side. I felt great and was doing well with how much I was making. No changes in how I did things at all. It was just a very average hour. Only thing I noticed was I was making tons of stupid mistakes. I was missing turns, driving too slow, even stopped at a green light as if it was a stop sign. 8 PM, I started working the south side. This is when things got weird. I left the west side with the sun still showing, but by the time I made it, the sun was completely gone. This was odd, considering I've never noticed it get so dark so fast before. I drive this almost every day, but this was different. It didn't just get dark in a normal way. It got dark normally, but this time I was hyper aware of it. It's hard to explain, but I just noticed it so much more than before. This is when my anxiety started creeping back. My legs get restless again. I start feeling like I needed to get out of my car and run a mile. I brushed it off though and continued my work, although I remained hyper aware of the darkness. And during one order, when I was picking up food, I could feel it. The darkness was heavy and deep, almost like a low frequency that I couldn't hear, but was vibrating throughout my body. I could feel the heaviness of my heart causing strain on my chest, and I thought I could hear it drumming in my ears. At 9 PM, I accepted an order that took me to the western area of the south side, an area and neighbourhood I've been in hundreds of times before. I stopped my car at the house, and something hit me like a ton of bricks. I felt scared, but not like average fear. There was this absolute sense of complete and total dread that overtook me. In an instant, I felt like I was being stared at. And I know, it's such a cliche thing to say, but I'm being completely serious when I say I would have bet all my money that there was someone in the backseat of my car. I could feel the heaviness, just like earlier in the night tonight. Sitting in my car in front of this home, I started to tear up, as I felt closer to death than ever before. I worked up the bravery to turn around, but of course, nothing was in my back seat besides the darkness that felt so heavy. It was made of solid matter. God, I cannot explain how physical the darkness of my back seat felt. Like I was staring at a person sitting in the back seat. Like their weight was being put onto the car, but no one was there. I got out of my car and saw another car pull up in the driveway off the home. I thought maybe I could hand it to them and get on my way, but they just sat in their car looking at me and looking down at the shining light that I could see was their phone. They did this 3 more times before I worked up the bravery and walked the order to the door, every step further increasing my sense of absolute horror. I dropped it off, took the picture, and rushed to my car. I turned to my left to see the person still sitting in their car in the driveway, face illuminated by their phone, just staring at me. I locked my doors and looked in the back seat. Still, nobody was there, and it was confirmed due to the light being on from opening the door. But because I locked the door, the light slowly dimmed to darkness. The feeling was heavier than ever before. As soon as the darkness of my backseat hit, it was like the car was full of people sitting back there, just staring intensely back at me. I couldn't look away from the darkness. I felt like I was being crushed by the fear, anxiety, and that very darkness. I turned my car around and drove off, noticing how the person in the car in the driveway was no longer in the car. 9:30, and I closed out my shift. I was sobbing in the driver's seat with my inside car lights on as I drove home. My mind was spinning. I was lightheaded. The sense of absolute total horror was gone, and in its place, a void. Emptiness. As if something occupied my soul for just a moment, and then left it wide open and vacant. I walked into my room. My wife greeted me, noting how I returned early. I fell into her arms and sobbed again. It's now 11 p.m. I'm sitting on my couch with all the lights on, and I feel utterly alone, empty, completely void of all emotion beside one feeling. A slight semblance of fear sitting in that empty void. My wife wanted me to take out the trash to the dumpster outside, but I can't do it. I don't know why, but I can't go back outside in the dark. Many of us encounter someone who just grabs our attention in a way that we can't explain, like they know you from this or a previous life. I come from a long line of people who encountered ghosts, but I myself don't encounter the supernatural that much. I have in the past, but not often. Tonight, I know I did. This is not fake or made up. Our town is near a beach, and every 4th of July, we go see the fireworks over the water. This year is no exception. Me and my wife arrived and set up chairs, settled in the sand, and chilled out waiting for darkness to fall and the fireworks to start. A slight breeze, a perfect, beautiful evening. About 20 minutes after we settled, I smelled a waft of what I can only describe as decayed roses on the breeze, like flowers in a vase that should have been thrown out a few days ago. It wasn't a bad smell, but just like sweet roses that weren't fresh. Then I saw her. From behind walked a young woman in jeans, t-shirt, and a ball cap. She looked about 25 and had light brown wavy hair coming down about halfway on her back. I was immediately struck by her presence, not because she was beautiful. I mean, she wasn't ugly, she was pretty. She looked a bit off. Her face especially looked pretty but weird, like her features didn't line up right or something. She stopped about 15 feet ahead of us and turned around. She looked right at me and smiled, then sat down in the sand. Again, she really looked off. Something was amiss. I looked at my wife to see what she thought, but got zero reaction, like she didn't even see her. I smelled the decayed roses in the wind again. The young woman in jean shorts and ball cap sat down, took off her flip-flops, and looked to the sky. She was sitting perpendicular to us, but facing away. When I thought about it, 2 more things struck me as very, very odd. She had no electronics, no cell phone. Everyone on the beach was taking selfies and playing with their phones, even the elderly. This young woman had no visible phone, no electronics. Also, her clothes looked straight out of the 1970s. I grew up in the 1970s, so I know what normal people looked like back then, and she had the 70s look. Totally down to the tomboy jeans and really just everything about her. She seemed very content just sitting there looking at the sky and not worried about cell phones or beach chairs or anything. Again, I smelled sweet decayed roses in the wind. I took a picture of the whole scene on my cell phone. The pretty sky, the beach, and this strange woman. Shortly after, she got up and walked away behind us. I turned around to see where she went, but she had disappeared. She was gone. When I got home and looked at the pic, I was actually not surprised to see she didn't appear in it. You might think I would have freaked out, but at some spiritual level, I really didn't expect her image to show up. Just a green orb appeared where she was sitting in the sand. I'm calm about it because I could tell she meant no harm. I really believe she was a person who passed away back in the 70s and was checking in on me for some reason. I'm racking my brains to try and remember if I knew a young woman who passed away when I was a child back then. She looked about 25 years old and straight out of the 1970s, like from a different era. I guess she had died in the 1970s. I looked through local obituaries in my town. We'll just call it Beachville, to protect my private info. I looked through online resources that had old newspaper stories of Beachville obituaries, but initially nothing turned up. So recently on a whim, I remembered the linked post again and decided to expand my search for a little. I searched old obituaries in the next town over. We'll call it Townville. And in those obituaries, something caught my eye. In the obituary, I saw the face of a woman who strongly resembled the young woman I saw at the beach. However, and this is the initially disappointing part, she didn't die in the 1970s. She died 4 months after I saw the 4th of July ghost last year, in November 2021. And here's the striking twist. According to her obituary, she was born in 1957, so she would have been in her 20s in the late 1970s. That sent chills down my spine. But this did too. According to the obit, she met her husband in my town, Beachville, in 1979. Bingo. A few days ago, early in the morning, my wife woke me up and said, "I hear someone rustling in the kitchen." I said, "Don't worry, it's probably just our cat." But our cat was on the floor next to the bed, ears up and face pointing towards the kitchen. I thought, okay, that's strange. So I went out to the kitchen to have a look, but no one was there and no noises. I chalked what my wife and cat heard up to a neighbour, refrigerator noise or something outside. That was that. Yesterday, I was upstairs at my parents' house and doing something for them. I was alone in the house. They were always at an appointment. While I was at the stairs, I heard rustling in the kitchen downstairs, like someone had come in and was walking around. So I thought maybe my wife or neighbour came over when they saw my car in the driveway, but it was very odd that they didn't knock first. Way too old. So I thought it could be a burglar. I then crept quietly downstairs and I peeked into the kitchen. No one there. I looked in all the downstairs room and no one was there. This morning, my wife wakes me up again and says she hears someone in the kitchen. I go out there and the kitchen was empty. We both got a little freaked out. So here I am trying to figure this out. If it's a ghost, it's following me because the incidents happened to both my home and my parents' home when I was present at both places. So why all of a sudden is this happening? I tried to think of a common denominator or some other reason that's going on. One common denominator is the kitchen, Because the noises we've heard in the kitchen of both my home and my parents' home, then it hit me. I'm a vinyl collector. I collect vinyl records from the 1950s up to the present day. So I recently bought a vinyl record online from a reputable seller in Europe. It was a record from 1967, and it arrived a couple of weeks ago at my house. Then, I brought it to my house, and because I really wanted to use some special cleaning solution my father had, so this record, I believe, is the key. The supernatural noises started shortly after it arrived, and the ghost, if it is one, followed the record, and from my house to my parents' house, I'm back. This supernatural energy is for some reason likes kitchens. I'm thinking this old record from 1967 probably has some weird history attached to it, but I'm now debating getting rid of it, even though it's one I really want. Wish there was a surefire way to cleanse it of weird energy. We as humans are products of the universe. Before we were even born, our mothers and fathers ate plants like string beans that the sun helped to grow. The sun is a product of space dust and gas that's been glowing for millions of years. The universe gave us our sun, our string beans, our life, all connected. We have the universe in us. Before we were born, our parents and descendants drank water that came from the ground through the water table, and some of it originated from the sky as rain, a product of our planet which spins through space on its axis. Again, we as humans need material in us that is linked to the greater universe. We all have the universe in us. Our brains create minute electrical impulses that travel across a delicate network. These minuscule neurotransmissions create thoughts. But this is an interesting link of our brainwaves to the greater universe. From the National Library of Medicine, 2021. Many think that these whole waves are not only restricted to the brain, but that they easily diffuse out and form an interconnected wave network with our universe. This notion is accepted by some neuroscientists and physicists, which is associated with consciousness or string theory. So if a living brain can connect to the internet of the universe, unwittingly even, who knows what could allow our minds to see? Like a cell phone downloading a picture from wireless invisible signals. We could be tapping into the human wavelengths that allow us to see and communicate with those like us who have passed on. We've only scratched the surface on this, but this might help explain unexpected apparitions or ghostly encounters. They're a product of our brains connecting to the internet of the universe, seeing things we never thought we could or should see, like dreams, but awake. Anyway, we decided to go hiking after 11 p.m. at night to one of the most used trails in our area. We had both been there multiple times throughout our lives, and neither of us were concerned about something happening. There was only one thing we were kind of nervous about, and that was the wildfire that had just happened. We parked on the side of the road and walked to the start of the trail. Even though there was the fire, the path was actually very clean and stable. We started walking up the trail when we just started talking about paranormal things, witchcraft and Wendigos. Terrible move on our side, talking about things of that sort. Now it's to be noted that we both had flashlights, very good ones, and we're both being very observant as to where we were on the path. As we got deeper into the conversation, we both realised in just a second that we're not on a trail anymore or anywhere near one. I mean, it was like in a blink of an eye. All of a sudden, I remember walking on the trail and then we just weren't. I freaked out and told him we need to start backtracking, but thankfully he said no, because we couldn't see any trail around us or anything we recognised. I truly believed if we tried backtracking, I would not be here writing this. He told me we needed to start walking up the hill in hopes of either standing on a ledge to see where we were or to find another path. We walked for a while up the hill when thankfully we popped out on a fire road. We walked all the way down terrified and came out on the road about a mile from where our car was. Encounter 1. I was really young, like in a toddler age, but I remember this moment very clearly. I was in our hallway because me and my mom were getting ready to head somewhere. My mom was in the bathroom, and suddenly I saw a person, looking like my mom, peeking behind a door frame with just the head peeking out and looking at me. Out of curiosity, I was heading into that room, but nobody was there. I don't know if I remember this correctly, so this might be a false memory. The following encounters are much more vivid. Encounter 2. So I'm currently 17 years old, and this happened to me a while ago. I think it was when I was in 3rd or 2nd grade. So basically, when I was 8 or 9. I had a very vivid dream that night, and I still remember exactly what I dreamed. Back then as a kid, I had terrible multiple nightmares of a dark cloaked figure haunting me, terrifying me in my sleep. So I was always damn scared to go to sleep because I didn't want to see it again. I also cried out of fear to go to sleep, etc. Anyways, in the dream, I was running away from something really big in a cave. I remember it as an ice giant, I don't know. And right when it got me, I woke up. Then I noticed that my room was unbelievably cold and that I was freezing, even under my blanket. I turned my lamp on, and then I saw something on the top of my wardrobe. A humanoid-looking shadow staring right at me. It did not move or something. Just looking at me. I don't remember it exactly, but I think it was light see-through. I screamed for help, and my mother came in after a short amount of time and also saw it. She still remembers the night very vividly and can assure me to the current day that there really was something staring at us. The room was really cold and no window was opened at the time. Then my mother called our neighbour, who was an esoteric-ish woman, who knew about this stuff very well. She used incense sticks to cleanse the room and told us we should have the furniture in my room moved for a better flow of energy or something. After that, nothing like that appeared for a long time. But sometimes, I still had very bad nightmares of that black thing haunting me and left me sometimes even really traumatized. I can't even describe how terrifying these dreams were to me back then. Encounter number 3. The best thing I can remember to this day. I think this one in 4th grade. These nightmares were still a thing, and when I opened up about it to our neighbour, a now very good friend of my mother, she told me to, while I was in the dream, imagine a light ball which is protecting me from the creature. I was actually able to be lucid in every of these nightmares, so I was also able to create this light thing which I was being terrorized by that black thing. But when the light ball was turning pitch black and everything was turning black, I woke up, really scared and full of panic. In an instant, I hid under my blanket. I always did that when I woke up from a nightmare. But then, suddenly I felt like I was being watched. Like not this typical type of feeling, like a gaze made of pure evil was piercing its eyes through me. I don't know what was going on in my head, but I risked a look and immediately locked eyes with a hovering white ghost-looking thing, which was looking very female, according to my memory. The last thing I remember is losing myself in the eyes of that thing, like I was falling and then blacking out. Turning back to dreaming, I even remember the dream I was having. There was nothing worth to mention. Encounter number 4. After the 4th encounter, again nothing happened for a long time. I continued my life and everything was cool. But then my mother found a new job and every day after school, I was alone at home till 8 p.m. or so because of her shift. Then things started to appear. While I was watching TV or doing something else, I heard random noises, like the squeaking of my mother's bed or even the sounds of a male person snoring in my mother's room. But the weirdest thing was that for a long period of time, I saw a shadow thing in the corner of my eyes moving around, nearly on a daily basis. I thought I was just hallucinating, but sometimes it moved wildly around. Way too much for just a hallucination. And in the middle of the day also.